Well, welcome everybody to session 2 of our Homes from Waste Symposium. I'm Tim McCarthy. I'm here at the wonderful Sustainable Buildings Research Centre in Wollongong, and the sun is shining. This session we have some great industry panelists. We've got Suzanne Toumbourou from ACOR, the Australian Council for Recycling. She'll be followed by David Haller, a National Operations Manager from Mirvac, Nick Comito, Head of Sustainability at Bingo Industries, and our final speaker for the session will be Emma Heffernan, a Senior Lecturer in Architectural Engineering here at the University of Wollongong. And in our Q&A session, we will have Makrita Solitei, a PhD candidate at the university who is immersed in circular economy research. So a great session ahead of us. And while Suzanne is setting up now, I'll just briefly introduce her. Suzanne is a great friend of the SBRC. She's been involved in our advisory council for a number of years. She was previously the executive director of ASPEC, the Australian Sustainable Built Environment Council, and is currently the chief executive officer, as I said, for the Australian Council of Recycling. Without further ado, I'll hand over to Suzanne because I know she's got some really important things to tell us this morning.
Thank you so much, Tim. And now I'm just going to make sure that my slides are appearing correctly and hear any warning signs if they don't. Okay, how am I looking?
That's great.
Yep, you're up, Suzanne.
Fantastic. And I'm so delighted to be at this SBRC symposium. As Tim mentioned, in my recent last role at the Australian Sustainable Built Environment Council, I was really privileged to be involved with the SBRC and see it evolve and thrive over the last decade. And I was particularly impressed to see it become the first building in Australia and one of the few in the world to achieve living building certification. And now I'm really excited to engage with SBRC in my new role as CEO of the Australian Council of Recycling. Who are we? Who is the Australian Council of Recycling? We are Australia's peak body for resource recovery, recycling and remanufacturing. We consist of industry leaders who are committed to leading the transition to a circular economy through the recycling supply chain. And looking at the built environment, we can see that the building sector has taken great strides in reducing operational emissions over the last decade. Australia is a global leader in property sustainability, with our top tier developers like Lendlease, Dexus, Frasers Property having led the global real estate sustainability benchmark for the last 11 years. And at a regulatory level, there's been strong progress in reducing operational emissions, with a up to 40% increase in energy efficiency for commercial buildings through the 2019 National Construction Code, and a forthcoming step change, I hope, for residential buildings in 2022. And now there is an increasing focus on embodied emissions, which you would have heard of, supported by the formation and growth of the Materials and Embodied Carbon Leaders Alliance, which has attracted around, I think, 100 leading firms from across the built environment. This has really been underpinned by strong and committed industry leadership, which has directed the sector's progress towards net zero through collaborative enterprises such as the Australian Sustainable Built Environment Council and organisations like the Green Building Council of Australia, who have helped to inform industry-led policies that have progressed both regulation and market. But Australia's top-tier developers are now looking to evolve from net zero to circular. They've already been so actively committed to net zero targets by or before 2030, and they're of course on track to hit these targets at that level. And their focus has evolved now to full circularity, to cradle thinking, which includes the uptake of recycled materials. But one inhibitor to a circular economy is, in my view, the language around waste, which is underpinned by very linear concepts. You extract a resource, make something out of it, use it and dispose of it, and the resultant material is waste. This concept is redundant in a circular economy. All waste is a potential resource. It just depends on the effort you go to extract it. However, the practice of transforming waste into resources alone does not deliver a circular economy. Although recycling is integral to a circular economy, it is one of many parts that comprise a systems-wide closed-loop economic approach. So the part I want to talk about, to a large extent, is recycling, but of course in the context of circular practices. And this approach targets zero waste and addresses a hierarchy of priorities relating to material use, with the most preferential being the reduction of the use of materials followed by reuse. Recycling sits under those two priorities and it's vital, but there are other things that should be done prior to getting there. From a construction perspective, I like to think of this as the ins and outs of construction. Going into construction, the first and most important step is designing out waste in the first place and procuring the right materials. Coming out of construction, you have recoverable materials, but also considerations around building operation. Of course, in design, you start with the end in mind to reach circular outcomes. You have to design for adaptability, disassembly, deconstruction and recovery. So recoverable, reusable and recyclable materials are a priority, which I'll talk about next. As are accessible connections and mechanical joinery rather than chemicals, for example, glues, to enable efficient and effective recoverable deconstruction. And adaptable design is vital so that the end of life of a building can be extended rather than having to demolish and rebuild too soon. At the procurement phase, material selection provides a great opportunity to reduce embodied emissions and embed recycled products. And Australia's recycling industry makes so much stuff, from low carbon bricks from organic waste to road-based asphalt additive made from, for example, toner cartridges, to outdoor furniture from soft plastics, to mulch and garden organics, and much, much more. A nice example that I've come across recently is the fourth. We're going to see some forthcoming plant in New South Wales in the form of the SaveBoard facility, which will be established, I think, sometime next year. Right now, they're operational in New Zealand. Tetra Pak has teamed up with SaveBoard to transform used cartons to building materials like plasterboard equivalents. Those recycled boards are also 100% re-recyclable back into new boards. And then there's the circular opportunity that construction and demolition processes offer. Construction and demolition has the highest recycling rate of all recovered resource streams, compared, for example, to municipal solid waste and commercial and industrial waste. And many leading C&D waste management companies are on a race to the top, looking at diverting somewhere between 90 and 97% of waste from landfill. A little later on, of course, you'll hear from ACOR member Bingo, who are doing an outstanding job in diverting C&D resources from landfill and bringing these resources back to the market. And so much can be recovered from construction and demolition sites. For example, bricks can be recycled back into garden bed material, timber into mulch, leftover polystyrene back into useful packaging, and road base back into road base. Another neat example of product stewardship is that of Dulux, who work on site with large construction companies to collect and recycle water-based paint drums and pails, and then reprocess these back into saleable sundry paint items to sell through Australian hardware stores. Diverting resources from landfill and recycling them back into recyclable materials is a really important priority. Finally, we need to think about when buildings are operational. It's essential that we are properly aware of the right recycling practices and can recycle properly. There are opportunities within the home and work to ensure that we recycle right. A key element is to address our typical set and forget recycling mentality. The fact is that recycling technologies and practices evolve and change and can also be different depending on where we are. So, for example, we're less likely to have access to sophisticated recycling plants in remote reaches of central New South Wales than in urban environments. So it's important to check what should and shouldn't go into your available recycling bin. Not only that, but policies change. So, for example, the export ban on different types of waste that has kicked in over the last year and will continue to roll out over the next couple of years will have an impact on how we're able to recycle and what we're able to receive as we transition to the full capacity to process everything on shore. Another element to think about is how you lead by example. Workplaces can really influence people's behaviour when it comes to ensuring diversion from landfill. The fact that cleaning and collection processes are visible and influence how people interact with recycling is really important. We've all heard stories, I think, of people witnessing general waste and recyclable materials being put into the same skip, for example, by cleaners. This can influence our own behaviours at the bin and our own faith in the recycling system. And so it's good to make sure that when you are undertaking these practices, particularly in a business context, that you are showing some leadership and helping to influence behaviours. Ultimately, the old adage of what gets measured gets managed is ever relevant for good recycling outcomes. So programs like Neighbours Waste can be a really good way to raise recycling consciousness and improve waste reduction outcomes. One of the great things about Australians is our broad desire to support recycling. The flip side of this is an effect called wish cycling, whereby the wrong thing is put into the recycling bin in the wish that it will get recycled, but it does result in contamination. Not everything should go into the recycling bin. For example, soft plastics get ensnared in recycling machinery, and broken glass and food waste just end up becoming a burden for recyclers to dispose of when they're put in the wrong bins, creating an extra cost to councils and communities. The golden rule is, if in doubt, check it out. And I'm fortunate enough to be working with an organisation that has helped to lead the development of a tool that can help everyone to check it out. RecycleMate is a tool for households. Soon there will be a commercial application, hopefully in the not too distant future. But it's intended to take the confusion out of recycling. RecycleMate is an artificial intelligence-backed, community-driven tool which tells you where to dispose of items based on where you are. It provides specific geolocated information about disposal options of household items with the aim of improving people's choices in recycling, reducing contamination in curbside bins, and increasing the recovery of recyclable and reusable products. Originally, the idea was to tell people which bin to put things in. But the fact is that several things should not go in the bin, like batteries and hazardous chemicals, for example. Also, there are a lot of recycling options outside of curbside systems like electronic goods that can be dropped off at, for example, your local office works, and runners, which can now go to many sports stores to be recycled into things like gym mats. RecycleMate provides this information by telling you which bin to put stuff in or showing you about alternative disposal locations. So from every level, when it comes to designing and constructing a building, all the way through to your household activities, there's a really important role for people to play and for everybody to play, and particularly in the context of buildings. Every phase of that building's life cycle is an opportunity to apply zero waste hierarchy principles and embed circularity. That's it from me. Thank you.
That was pretty good. Thank you very much, Suzanne. Just checking to see if we've got questions in the Q&A. I'll start off, and I'll start off by saying a comment. RecycleMate just seems like a fantastic initiative, and I can't wait for it to be available. And you highlighted there the difficulties of recycling in different locations, particularly remote areas. What can we do for these remote areas who would have, they end up with having everything in a tip, basically? Are there options for remote communities?
There are, and so one of the really good things about this moment in time is that there is unprecedented, I would say, Nick, you might have more history in this, investment in recycling infrastructure and capacity. And so through the Recycling Modernisation Fund, we've seen a good effort made on remote communities and regional areas on delivering infrastructure to there and skilling up. At the same time, there might just be different ways that you engage with recycling depending on geography. So one example might be, for example, when you're in a densely populated urban area, we have, by virtue of the population, we have access to a lot more sophisticated plant that might process things like glass, say from bottle to bottle. In your less populated areas, it might not be economical to transport something as heavy as glass all the way into those areas. And instead, you might find that it is more economical and really productive to downcycle into something like road base, which can be applied locally. So there's a balance between driving towards really high levels of technical sophistication that might rely on forms of population density, and thinking about where you can go circular in a local way too.
Thank you for that. There is a question which is, I suppose it's a personal one in a way for you, about your role at ASBEC and your role now. And do you see there's much crossover? I know you're the perfect person for the last role, and you're also the perfect person for this role. You've seen things from both sides now, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. I get that. I feel like I'm on the other side of the looking glass. When I was at ASBEC, it was almost a decade there, the conversation had really matured and coalesced around net zero. And industry was, I'd say, at least amongst the 30 peak bodies that were ASBEC members, and the countless institutions, including SBRC, there was a real shared context around the priority of net zero and the methods that could be delivered. In the last few years that I was there, of course, there was a raised consciousness about circularity, but the question of how to still hadn't really been unpacked, and it still is being unpacked, in fact, across the whole of the economy, not just within built environment. Moving over into ACOR, I can see from the other side what it looks like and what the challenges are to circular outcomes, and how important it is, for example, starting from a design perspective or a producer perspective, to, as I mentioned in the presentation, start with the end in mind, but also, I guess, the challenges that the recycling sector faces in making sure that they can deliver recycled and recyclable outputs. So I feel like I'm in ACOR, helping to deliver some of the solutions to circular economy, and being able to see much more clearly what it will take to help to get there, including, for example, ensuring that we're able to engage in really thriving in market, which the building sector must be part of. Ensuring that producers take responsibility for what they deliver into those markets, ensuring that consumers, and I mean consumers at all levels, from business all the way through to individuals in households, understand how to recycle right. But the kind of the bottom and invisible layer, which is something that I'd say at least Nick is quite familiar with, is the regulatory landscape, which probably would take another day to discuss, which I'd say hasn't quite yet caught up with circular priorities, and is still more or less tackling the challenge of waste management in a linear context. And that was something that was very invisible from a built environment perspective until I crossed over to the other side.
I've got two more questions. That was really good. The first is about looking to the future. And we heard earlier that the circular economy is going to be a great employer of people and of cleverer people. But what do you see as being the big industry evolutions in the next 5 years?
That's a big question. I think, what do I see? What do I hope? Can I start with hope? Yeah. One is, and this is an age-old dialogue in sustainability networks, but true ownership of what are now considered market externalities, ensuring that producers take responsibility one way or another, either through voluntary or mandatory measures for what they deliver into the market, ensuring that there is a fundamental prioritisation of recycled materials back into the market, and that we shift standards and specifications, for example, in a way that helps to prioritise that, and make sure that we are delivering, quality, durable, safe products, but recycled products back into the market. And that takes not just kind of the, a technical shift, but also a cultural shift, to make sure that the supply chains re-gear to embed that back in. I think there's also necessary technological shifts that are and will continue to evolve in terms of addressing what we now, consider hard to recycle materials, and particularly in a composite context, and making sure that as we evolve to recycle and re-recycle certain materials, soft plastics, I'd say, are at that cutting edge, and how we, through chemical recycling, address the volume. How we at the same time address, as I said right at the at the beginning of this comment, what is coming into the market, and how we avoid and reduce what comes in terms of those hard to recycle materials, and how we ensure that we reuse and reuse and reuse until we need to recycle.
Thank you very much. Probably got time for 2 more questions before we let you go. Do you think there is a need, I think you've already answered this, a need for product stewardship regulation?
I like to borrow the Green Building Council's language in that context, and talk about carrots, sticks and tambourines. Yes is the answer, and more. So you need to make sure that there is a very high incentive to do so, and I think really there is a huge consumer appetite, and so already a lot of companies are at least promising better sustainability outcomes from what they produce. At times, I'd say there's a gap between what might be promised and what's actually delivered, and I'm hoping that that gap is due mostly to naivety rather than deliberate greenwashing. But that gap has to be addressed, because I think there's a lot of rhetoric around delivering strong circular and recycled outcomes, and it needs to be met with actual real outcomes. So we do. There is work to be done in the voluntary context, but I think consumer engagement really helps with that, and being able to, like the what is it, the old healthy heart tick, being able to confirm that you are doing the right thing by the environment and by people is an important thing. On a mandatory level, yes, look, I think the sector would really like to see targets for recycled material in particularly at a government procurement level, with government being the largest, if not only, I don't know how to work that one out, infrastructure client in the country, and taxpayer funded at that. I'd say there is a responsibility to embed circular outcomes in whatever is paid for by the taxpayer, and it's good for everybody. And then on top of that, the tambourines, making sure that we shine a light on and celebrate whatever we are achieving, and instill good, strong confidence by everybody in, for example, recycling. I think the last few years have, to some extent, been a bit hard from a consumer perspective to have good faith that we're achieving recycling outcomes. However, we are recycling, we're making stuff, the sector is delivering, and we are recovering so much, and Nick can take you through some great examples of that, and making sure that that's really visible, and we take pride in what we're able to achieve, and see a lot more of it domestically.
I think that's really important as well, that we need to shine the light where it's worth shining. Last question for you, Suzanne, I think it comes from the heart. It's coming from Ross. He's an apartment dweller, and he doesn't have access to FOGO recycling. So his question is, are there solutions that have been implemented for large residential complexes, like greater than 100 people, to reduce their waste and become more circular in an apartment context?
There is work underway. I think that there are, and I do apologise for not being across the details specifically. There is a big interest in seeing multi-unit residential being better serviced in terms of recycling outcomes. And I'd say, I mean, you have to realise there are over 500 local government areas across the country, and many of them do things quite differently to each other. And so some are leading, some are lagging. There are diverse opportunities, but multi-unit residential and also multi-use developments are an absolute area of concern. There is a growing consciousness and action on how to address it. We're not there yet. More work needs to be done. And I think also more householders need to push for this too. So thank you for that question, because I think it's important to make sure that that individuals like Ross keep pushing for it as well. We all work together towards that outcome.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Suzanne, for that wonderful presentation and fielding so many different questions. Really, it's a pleasure to have you at the SPRC again, even though it's virtual. And thanks once again.
Tim, thank you. And I wish you all the best for this great symposium.
Thank you so much. So our next speaker, I'm delighted to introduce David Haller from Mirvac. David is the National Operations Manager of the Master Planned Communities Division. He's a home builder, superb, that he has actually built over 7,000 homes during his 20-year career at Mirvac. So he's made a big dent into not only the provision of homes for people, but the work that they've done at Mirvac has sought to reduce waste, increase the amount of prefabrication and off-site construction in their projects. And I've met David a number of times through Prefab Oz, the peak body for the prefabricated construction industry, and attended many of his presentations. So I'm really keen to hear what he's going to tell us today about reducing construction waste. Over to you, David.
Thank you very much, Tim. And just wanted to thank everyone for obviously the opportunity. University of Wollongong and SPRC, I think firstly, I'm a little bit under the weather, but I was not going to cancel on this one. I really like these opportunities. So apologies if I cough a little bit of the way through. I'm going to try and get through it as efficiently as I can. Thanks for the intro. And I really do want to start by saying that firstly, Suzanne's presentation is fantastic. Actually ties into a lot of what I'm going to say. So well done, Suzanne. Thanks for the helping hand there. Look, we've got obviously a lot of discussions here, and obviously reuse and recycle is one, and Mirvac does really well in that space. So we are one of the ones that partner well with our waste providers like Bingo to get the 95% recycled. But today I'm going to talk about just reducing construction waste, because we've for many years done really well at recycling, but if we're still recycling and we're still having to manage 10 or 12 tonnes per house of waste, that's still a problem. Today I'm going to sort of talk about a range of different things within the, I suppose, opportunities within Mirvac. And for today, I want to talk about just why, firstly, we need to reduce construction waste, because there are many, many reasons and some not so obvious. There's also just some key factors for success that I really do want to, focus on in today's presentation, keeping in mind it's only 15 minutes, so I'm only going to scratch the surface. And you'll probably see someone that's construction background to the core, i.e., I started in bricklaying at 13 years old, but most people that are this deep in construction aren't usually in love with the concept of sustainability. I'm definitely one of those, so you might find me a little bit odd, but at the same time, the passion that comes out of what I'm saying is because there is a severe importance for this in our industry moving forward. And I want to share the factors of the success we've had and the learnings. I also want to talk about how technology and digital engineering has been an absolute godsend in terms of being able to find better ways to reduce construction through the design. And I think Suzanne mentioned that as well, which was great to hear. And then I'll finish up with just a bit of a case study around prefabrication as being one area where we have found is a significant opportunity to reduce waste in construction. So firstly, why? I recently read a national waste report by the government showing that 27 million tonnes of construction waste per year. There's effectively 44% of the entire waste produced in this country. That is pretty scary in itself. And obviously the social, environmental and economic costs are phenomenal. So there is a big reason why. And another reason that I want to make mention of too, having been at Mirvac for 20 years and pretty much done every job along the way, I can tell you that when you have that much waste on site, it increases stress for the supervisors, increases potential risk with waste being everywhere, increases cost, increases the chance for program delays. There are so many great benefits to reduce construction waste. Firstly, I also want to mention, I'm pretty fortunate working for Mirvac. We have a corporate driver, which is from the top, which makes it a little bit easier for us to trial new things. We have a range of things we're targeting. Procuring 25% recycled content is going well, but also halving development waste, which is a big one. And most recently, we've been able to be carbon positive 9 years ahead of schedule, which was recently publicised in the last week or two. So it's great for a corporate company like ours to be, I feel, responsible for leading the way. One of the reasons why I'm always enjoying putting my hand up for these things is because I think the industry needs real life examples of how it's done, because I think the concept of, being able to think through ways and the hypotheticals are great, but we're able to actually really trial these things and then share it back to the industry. So first, I want to start with the key factors for success. And some of these might be obvious, but I just want to share in relation to some of the nature of how Mirvac's learned these things. Firstly, timing is everything. And it's something internally in our business I struggle with a little bit, is you must get in early to discuss the concept of the design and how that is going to potentially look at ways to reduce waste. Also, again, using technology to reduce waste in construction is absolutely vital. You really can't do it with the old school adage of just looking at two-dimensional plants. Probably the one that I find the biggest bang for buck is the concept of collaboration. With the designers, manufacturers of materials and the construction businesses to collaborate and working towards this. And the best way to collaborate and understand is to share the benefits for everyone, which sort of ties into that last element, which we're learning the most about, is how do we collect and assess the data to continually share for everyone the benefits of reducing waste. So I'll dive into all of those a little bit further. Firstly, timing is everything. There's a little graph we use within the Mirvac business. It's pretty simplistic and we make it like that on purpose. Early visioning stages is where the most opportunity for change comes. The further you get down the design development life cycle, the harder it is to make these kinds of changes. And as further you get down, the cost of that change increases quite significantly. This resonates pretty well within our business, and it's starting to also resonate externally with our supply chain as well. Secondly, just the hierarchy of waste management. I like this slide. I stole it from the internet somewhere, and I'll be honest about that, but I like it because the aim is to eliminate and reduce, not just manage and recycle. We are really trying to eliminate through design, so we're not having to deal with it on the construction site, because reducing construction waste, when we're in construction, it's a little bit too late to get anything in terms of a major change. So how is the best way? As I've mentioned before, digital engineering. So this is something that I think most people on the line today would probably understand. This is no new scenario, but I wanted to talk today about how you utilize technology and BIM in order to first understand the model a little bit better, doing the design discussions in an earlier phase. You can start to then do your 4D planning of the site, which also allows us to be able to manage deliveries, waste and the like. The 5D quantification has been a godsend for us. Someone that's got a bit of an estimating background as well, the old school days of a highlighter and a scale rule to figure out how many materials you need and wonder why we over order, over deliver on site. Well, the model gets that to the nth degree. Extracting that information allows us to be much more closer when it comes to material procurement. Also, the model allows us to partner with the supply chain and unlock opportunities for prefabrication, and I'll talk about why that saves a lot in waste as well. Also, capturing data and extracting data. The amount of data that lives in the model is really where all the answers are. Understanding the material sizes and how that correlates with designs of homes, and being able to establish how we can also use these models for AR and VR to give the visualization opportunity for the teams to be able to look for opportunities. So this is something that, I just recorded the other day while I was looking through one of our models. Here's a project we have coming up, and I think what I want to share here is this is not actually too difficult. This is a software called Ritso that we use, and forever and a day, our construction teams would sit around a table with two-dimensional drawings and try and establish what opportunities for improvement, efficiency. Now we've got the opportunity to use the technology. This technology is something that can give us better understanding of dimensions, how we can look at different ways to adjust our house dimension to suit material standard sizes, or talk to the material manufacturers about how they can adjust their sizes a bit more with our dimensions. It also allows us to start interrogating 2D plans on a 3D overlay. This also gives my construction team a far better opportunity to just really understand ways in which we can develop more efficiencies on the ground. These sorts of things is not something that is ultra expensive anymore either. So I do encourage more and more these opportunities for talking with university students, because you're the next generation that when you get into the industry, this is the only way you're going to be doing it. And the old days of two-dimensional PDFs have got to be over soon, because it's just not the way to get efficiency. I will say that when we get that first layer, we then take it to the second layer and say, well, I can now start partnering with the supply chain. So we have on the left-hand side our digital model, on the right-hand side is the model from the manufacturer. As you can see on the right-hand side, you can see materials fixed to the external cladding. External cladding is where we get most of our waste. You can see there odd-shaped pieces of that cladding. It's allowing us to understand what are the inefficiencies and where do they exist. So this is how we can interrogate way before we get to site and try and reduce the waste. I think the next thing I want to talk about is Mirvac's prefab journey that has also so many benefits, but one is around sustainability, reduction in the carbon footprint of construction, but also in waste reduction. And the way we've done that has been capturing and learning from the data. But we've been doing this for quite a while now, and I've got to say, it's not been all roses. We've learned over a long period of time in a lot of different ways. We started with a pretty exciting 30% waste reduction, and then we started to generate and interrogate the data and wonder how can we increase that. Over the last 8 years, we've been doing more and more with prefab and getting more and more benefit in waste reduction. Now, and most recently, we are consistently getting at least 50% reduction of waste on site, which is a phenomenal shift for us. And everyone says to me straight away, yeah, but you're doing prefab, so isn't the waste just in the factory? Before anyone asks that, the answer is no. The ability to control waste in a facility compared to on site is chalk and cheese. We have a significant benefit through using prefabrication, and we're starting to use bathroom pods as well now. Where bathroom pods are quite commonly used in apartments, not many people are using it in housing, and we're seeing even better ability to save on construction waste generated on site. Some of the other ways, and I really want to focus on this as well as being a very important part. We first need to understand where are the waste issues. So being able to partner with our waste contractors like Bingo and others that we use to understand what are they taking away from our sites and where are the big issues. We have to learn benchmarks first before we focus on where our priorities are. We've understood that we want to focus on things like external cladding and timber, concrete, because that's where most of the waste comes from. We also need to understand that the data then also converts into dollars. You know, we spend a lot of money dealing with waste every single year, and it's something that when we can start to pick apart where we spend our money, we can start to reframe the benefits for the wider business. And a lot of people jump on board when you can put a commercial benefit overlay into the business. So, as I said, I'm going to run through this quickly, and I just want to summarize because it is quite a lot of words I just chucked out there in 10 minutes. But basically, we must work together on this. And this is not a, you know, fanciful, let's sit in a room, hold hands and sing Kumbaya. And I really do feel like the industry's starting to get onto this. That individual brilliance is not going to get this. The collaboration is the only way we move forward. So firstly, awareness and education. We need to keep sharing the information. We need to start early in the design, and we need to promote the benefits so everyone wants to jump on this, doesn't feel forced to. We also need to know the cost imperative too and forecast those financial benefits. I spoke to you about the project that we are having coming up where we're going to show the digital model. That's 180 homes, and the entire project we're going to do with prefab. We know that we roughly do, and the industry does on normal size homes, approximately 10 tons of waste per home. It's pretty embarrassing. With using prefab on this project, 180 homes, we are forecasting to save in the order of 1,200 tons of waste will not come to site. When you can forecast that up front, it actually gives a lot more impetus for people to want to jump on board. And that then shows the project and operational cost improvements for everyone that is involved. And that ties into the next one, the responsibility of all stakeholders. It can't be construction guys, you sort it out when you get to site. It can't be designers, you guys work it out before and we'll get the benefits later on. It's got to be a combined attempt towards getting this benefit. We also need to keep using technology, use the digital technology platform that exists. It is so advanced these days, and also continue to look for unlocking opportunities for prefabrication. And finally, last slide, we need to build a culture of shared ownership to eliminate this waste. It has to be everyone's input. It has to be everyone's responsibility. We also need to continue to utilise DE just to maximise those design for manufacture and assembly opportunities, because prefab really does take it to a next level of reducing waste. We need to keep improving the data capture and use that to create transparent and informed decision making about how we make selections on materials and discuss with our supply chain, and just keep engaging all stakeholders to reduce this waste. So apologies if I've gone too fast there. It's just my nature. I'm pretty passionate on this subject, but I will leave it there. And I just thank you again for the opportunity to talk about this. And honestly, I have 500,000 extra slides and 500,000 extra words to talk about on this, because it is something we have learned so much over time. And I'm more than happy to share any further detail after this session. And thank you again for the opportunity to talk today.
Thank you so much, David. I'm always impressed to hear what Mirvac are doing, and your passion always comes through. I love that idea of collaboration and sharing the benefits, and I think we might hear some more of that when we get into our panel session. David will be staying with us for the panel session, and so I'd like you to hold your questions for that, and we'll go straight into our panel session where we've got another set of short presentations, and then we'll have all the experts available to answer questions together. And our moderator for the panel session will be Makrita Solitei, our PhD candidate here at the University of Wollongong. The first presenter, well, I'll just say who the presenters are. We've got Nick Comito from Bingo Industries, Emma Heffernan from Architectural Engineering here at the University of Wollongong. So Nick, I've stolen your bio from the Fifth Estate. So if I've got anything wrong, it's all my fault. You're head of sustainability at Bingo Industries, and Bingo Industries is not a gambling organization. It's actually, we all see your bins around the place. So it's a very big organization in New South Wales in particular, providing waste management services and recycling centres. And I'm impressed by the way Bingo goes above the compliance on sustainability. And you know, you're not just dealing with waste, but you're trying to deal with the problem of waste, which I think is a wonderful aspect to your work. I love the work that's going on in relation to the Recycling Ecology Park at Eastern Creek. I'm not sure if you're going to cover that in your presentation, but I might ask you questions about that. And you know, you've been around in other industries. I see that you've been Director of Sustainability at Optus and also Australia Post. So I'll hand the floor to you, Nick, and thank you very much for being here.
Yeah, thanks very much, Tim. And I'm dependent on Emma here to switch through slides, so we'll jump on to the next one. Thanks, Emma, and the next one again. So first of all, thanks very much for having me. Again, like David, we are very passionate about sustainability and what we do. And interestingly, I just think from a company perspective, and what I think is a really interesting facet about what we do, particularly, and some of the other waste, I guess some of the other people in the sector are starting to move this way, is we're really using the levy to be able to help us to make more money, because the less that we put into our landfills, the less we have to pay for levies, to be perfectly candid. So recovery makes a lot of financial sense. So we're very much an advocate of standardization of those levies across the board, and also having that levy at the right levels, so that it does actually divert waste from landfill. It will sort of really stimulate innovation, in my opinion. So I'll just very quickly on this slide, just to give you a bit of an idea, we're currently in New South Wales and in Victoria. We've got a larger than metro footprint, but that's predominantly where we play. We've just recently been bought out by Macquarie Infrastructure Real Assets, and I guess part of our business strategy is to geographically expand, but also vertically expand. So we're going to see that sort of happening over the next year or two, and we'll see that footprint change. But a bulk of our work is in New South Wales and Victoria. Move to the next slide, please, Emma. Thank you. company overview, we do look after commercial waste as well. A large majority of what we do is through the construction and demolition waste. So we deal with contaminated soils and a raft of other things. Another important facet of what we do is we actually manufacture the bins. A lot of the bins that you see around the traps are manufactured by Bingo. So we actually do go through that process of manufacturing onshore in Australia. We'll jump to the next slide. Thank you. So, and as Tim was touching on, and again, this is just going to be a brief overview, so I'm not going to stick too long on my slides. We do have a fairly significant facility out at Eastern Creek, and it's a shame we were going to try and get the class there, but unfortunately, with just the way that COVID's played out this year, was not tenable, which is unfortunate. But it's quite a significant facility. We have just we're under commission of a brand new facility out there, which we've aptly named MPC2, which is our Materials Processing Centre. It's the second one. And it's a large facility that has quite a lot of capacity. We envisage that will see us sort of move up towards a 90% recovery rate. We're currently at about 83% recovery of what comes through the door. The truth is, depending on customers and how it comes through, we are able to achieve higher rates than that. However, this is just at the aggregated total for that facility. We do have a master plan for that facility, and we are taking a look at the options to actually increase recovery through looking at the residuals, and that's something that's really important to us because that's going to help us to push up closer to that 95%, which is what we're really focused on. Next slide, thanks. Okay, just to touch on this very briefly. So the Green Building Council has a responsible construction element within their brand new waste management area, and there is points allocated to it, and effectively it's taking a look through environment management systems and plans, and it's really good to see this flagged within there. What's interesting as well is within their operational waste component, they've actually touched on the design, which is really important because where the challenges are for a lot of organisations is the buildings aren't designed in a way that to actually manage waste appropriately. Now that might be out on the floor, but also when you get down to actually collect and all of those bins together. So we end up with issues, and that's where we end up with issues with people being able to treat waste properly. Pop to the next slide. This one's just a very high overview to give you an idea of some of the, I guess, the major types of streams of waste that can end up coming through us, and then what we effectively do with them. We do have a landfill at site, and we do utilise that particularly for like contaminated waste, like asbestos contaminated, but also for our residual. But as you can see, a lot of material is actually separated at the site. The brand new facility I did talk about actually has a whole raft of new technology in it that allows us to optically sort, but also uses AI to help us to actually realistically, really, I guess, recover as much as possible of those streams that are coming through. And we're also starting to start to play with robotics. In fact, David, it's actually been some work that we did with Mirvac that is really sort of helping us to sort of move down the pathway of, I guess, furthering our digital assets to make sure that we're trying to improve the way that we're able to separate, but also more importantly, report on that as well. It's a critical piece of work, and Mirvac has been really on the front foot in terms of really achieving their goal of 100% diversion from landfill. Next slide, please. And just on the back end, we do actually generate, particularly with the bricks and concretes, as you would imagine, different ranges of aggregates that we can utilise, different timbers and mulches. This is quite important, and I think that we're really waiting to see the market really get some clear indicators for the use of these products. We do have some specifications in New South Wales through I think it's Transport now, but it was the RMS. So we do have some sort of specifications for some of the products, but we are really sort of yet to see really full uptake of full circular outcomes. And it's really interesting because I think there's some fantastic stories to be able to be told about taking waste from facilities and then being able to reutilize it back at those facilities or other sort of programs where it's relevant. And I do touch on decarbonisation here as well. At the corporate level, we're committed to alignment with a science-based target. We're going to be net zero by 2040. We will be 100% renewable electricity at all of our facilities by 2025. Now, on the carbon side, I see there's two elements. First of all, there's the embodied carbon of the products that we produce, but then it's also our operational carbon footprint is really important, because then that helps to really flag, I guess, the right indicators for our customers and our suppliers, our intent in decarbonisation, and helping to, I guess, really move the needle in terms of decarbonising across the whole value chain. And that's what I've got, Tim, for now. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Nick. That's pretty impressive, and I think it ties in quite well with what David was saying. And it's nice to see there is a link between what David's doing and what you're doing, and that it is that collaboration is happening. So we will be having a Q&A session after our next speaker. So I'd like to introduce Emma Heffernan. Emma is a senior lecturer in architectural engineering. She's actually the program director of the architecture and engineering program at the University of Wollongong, and has been a research fellow here at the Sustainable Buildings Research Centre prior to that. She's an architect with over a decade experience of architectural practice in the UK, holds a PhD from the University of Plymouth, and has a beautiful English accent. Over to you, Emma.
Okay, thanks, Tim. Sorry, you had me laughing at my accent. Right. So I'm going to be, as the last speaker in these morning sessions, probably touching on lots of the things that other people have said before me. I've been working on a project at the moment with Tim and with Leela, who's done the fantastic organisation of this symposium today and the Sustainable Homes Challenge. We're doing an online course for Construct New South Wales, and it's allowed us to delve into how can we deal with construction waste. So there's going to be a lot of overlap, and it's great to see that we're all talking about the same things, and this will hopefully wrap things up with a good positive list of strategies that people can actually work with when they're trying to think about reducing construction waste. So we've got a growing problem of construction waste. As David said, 44% of Australia's waste is produced by the construction and demolition sector. And whilst we've been reducing household waste by 20% over the last 13 years, construction and demolition waste has increased by 32% over that same period. So there's obviously something that we need to be doing as a sector. And as Suzanne said, we're starting to talk about circularity, but really, you know, we've got to grips with operational sustainability, operational energy, but we need to start to think about what goes into our buildings and what comes out of them. And a statistic that shocked me when I came across it: waste collection and disposal costs the Australian construction industry $2 billion every year. And, you know, Leela and I have had conversations with David and his colleagues at Mirvac, and, you know, I know that Mirvac has an interest in actually working out what the true cost of waste is, because that's the costs that people are paying to collect and dispose. But what about the actual materials that have come to the site that they've already paid for and they're chucking into the bin? And what about the labour that's managing those materials and the administration costs of managing those materials? So, you know, part of that is that we need to reconceptualise waste as resources. So what we've done is we've gone through looking at best practice from around the world, thinking about waste minimisation strategies for the construction industry, and we've broken those down into three stages of things that we can do before construction, pre-construction, things that we can do during construction, and things that we can do after construction. And it was kind of, and I think this overlaps with previous speakers, the largest number of strategies that we came up with were actually at the pre-construction stage. And so, you know, everything that people have been saying, it's about that avoiding. What can you do to stop the waste from actually even stop the materials from getting to the site to become waste? So things like making waste a priority, so setting targets, which Mirvac are doing a great job with doing that. Projects can have a waste champion, someone who takes the role of championing waste reduction at every step of the way, using existing resources. So that might be thinking about, if you're dealing with a site that has an existing building on it, adaptively reusing that building rather than demolishing it in the first place. design strategies. So that's things like material optimization, design for offsite construction, design for adaptability, design for deconstruction, collaboration. So again, crossing over with what David had talked about, thinking about that design documents need to focus on that waste reduction, collaborating during the design process across the different design and construction teams, using BIM and developing a deconstruction plan. Things that we can do during construction, on-site waste management. So, having a decent site waste management plan and waste facilities. Nick's colleague Roz took us on a virtual tour of the Eastern Creek site yesterday, and she was saying that far and away site separated or source separated materials are cleaner and far easier to go into the reprocessing process. Talking the talk, so that's actually always keeping waste on the agenda. So monitoring it, reporting it during construction, communicating and educating so that people on the site all know what the plans are and how they can play their own part. Construction methods, so things like thinking about the way that temporary works are done. So there are different processes, if you are using ply shuttering for your concrete formwork, then a large proportion of that at some point is going to end up in waste. There are other solutions that can avoid that. Thinking about leasing a service of lighting rather than actually procuring lighting, etc., in a way that we would ordinarily, and using offsite construction. And then also thinking about protecting materials during delivery and storage on site, and procurement policies. So that might be agreeing with your supplier that they will buy back any unused materials if you have overordered. And then things that we can do post-construction. So, at the end of the project, and this is again something that David touched upon, that you're actually evaluating. So at the end of the project, what lessons have we learned? How did we go? We planned to do this. How did we meet those targets or miss them? What could we do differently? How could we do it better? Thinking about maintenance, and so building that into the design process so that things, can be simply accessed and repaired rather than having to be quite destructive when something breaks and has to be replaced. Having a deconstruction plan at the stage that it's been constructed so that people know how to take that apart. Again, this has been discussed. Suzanne talked about using screws rather than glues. And then again, back to where we started from, thinking about adaptive reuse. So that's kind of a whistle-stop tour through the strategies that we identified. And hopefully you've got some good questions for us all.
Well, thank you, Emma. I'm going to hand over to Makrita now, and I will invite all the speakers to answer some questions. So Makrita, if you'd like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your work, and then we can get into the questions. We can't hear you, Makrita.
I will swap. I think, is that better?
That's better, yep.
Awesome. I think I'll just swap computers. I knew I needed to have two at the same time because something will happen. But thank you so much for having me. Thanks so much to our panelists. That was such interesting and good findings. Like, it excites me every time someone talks about reduction of waste, circular economies, and maybe because I'm biased since that's my whole PhD for the past 3.5 years, and I'm coming towards the end and I'm like, yes, there is jobs in the market. No, I'm kidding, but there is something that's happening in the market, and that gives me so much courage. And so I'm looking at waste circular economies, particularly in Kenya, the global south. So focusing on the global south because circularity has been happening there for years, but it hasn't been called that. And people have been working within waste sectors and using those materials to build houses, to build roads, but yet there's limited research in that space. So basically my whole PhD is just trying to look through those supply chains, bring waste pickers and informal sectors within the global south and trying to highlight the work that they've been doing for years, and seeing how that fits within the general or the wider scope of a circular economy model. So that's about my PhD, but maybe just diving into the questions right now. And I have 2 questions for David and a few for Emma as more questions come in, for Nick as well. And one of the questions for David is around scalability. And in the context of that prefabricated construction, do you find any limits on the scale of production for, say, bathroom pods? Do you need to be working with 100 homes, or can you see this working for just an individual home market?
Very good question. And to be honest with you, it is actually probably one of the toughest battles we have. The manufacturing supply chain for prefab elements in Australia is not very deep. It's actually quite new. Bathroom pods, I'm not seeing too much of an issue because there are quite a few manufacturers that do large volumes every year. But to answer your point, yes, unfortunately, if you're trying to do it for one home, you're not going to be commercially viable. We are getting it down to very smaller numbers, but the idea is to try and have the optimization over a range of homes, range of projects, range of states, because the economies of scale are pretty important. In terms of prefabrication for panelization, walls and floors, once again, yes, there is a much bigger benefit when you can do more of them, but we are finding that even a group of 4 homes and we're able to make it work by offsetting some of the benefits up front to basically balance out the cost.
Yeah, and it's good that you brought up that cost factor there, because the second question is around that efficiency, cost, and education or creating awareness. So one of our questions is around, he or she is an engineer and is asking, as someone who uses parametric modeling to design structures, they understand how CAD and prefab can help reduce that waste. However, there's the sentiment that medium and high density is too much of a cookie cutter sort of model, and architecture has to lose its way to efficiency and cost reduction over aesthetics and form. So how then can we address those form versus function debates, and how can we educate people and create that awareness to a majority of suppliers, building construction, and even just owners, homeowners?
Firstly, the anonymous person, you get the prize for the best question because it is literally the largest issue I've always had. Mirvac's an integrated model, which means everyone's in-house, including Mirvac Design. They are also been there for 20, 30 years plus. Trying to convince people that we can have a mid-ground has been tough, but we are finding it. The best way I can address this is to say, those homes that are on my back screen, they were all done with prefab. The idea of trying to find the balance is to say that, and the best analogy I can always give is car manufacturing industry, and I like the Mercedes as an example. There are 50 types of Mercedes, but 70% of those Mercedes are the exact same things. Door trims, steering wheels, foot pedals, all the same. But you can price it from 40K to 400K based on the other 30, 40%. We're using the same principle. I'm teaching our design teams that you can go for your life on facades, being able to put whatever you like, because I don't want to work at a company where we're building the same house over and over again either. We have to have pride in the fact that in this society, in Australia, aesthetics are very important to the customer market. So we try and get to that point of a mid-ground. Standardize, optimize the basic dimensions, the house, bathrooms, standardize those. And then use other elements that are the most important, streetscapes, facades, and go for your life in terms of variety. And we're finding that mid-ground. Hope that answers it. It's definitely not a battle that we've won yet, but we are far, far along the track. So great question.
Awesome. Thanks so much, David. And just a question here for Emma is, are there some facts that you've discovered along your research in terms of the new construction cost that has actually surprised you? Is there something that's standing out that you're like, oh, I did not expect that?
Yeah, I think the biggest one was probably the one that I touched on, the cost to the industry. And, you know, as I said, that's the direct cost of the disposal, and it doesn't take into account all of the other elements that are related to that. So it's just huge. And, you know, so that's why when people ask about cost, and I'm sure that David would agree with this, that actually saving waste is saving money, because, you know, it's it's crazy to think that we put all of these virgin materials that people have put so much energy and effort and resources into, that we chop them in half and throw half away and put half in the building. It's just, that I think that's surprising. And yeah, it's just the sheer scale of it. So it definitely flags it as something that we need to be thinking about on a daily basis. We need to work it out, because it's going to have massive environmental and economic cost savings.
Can I just add a little bit to that, because it's a great point. The other part is understanding more of the different elements is actually part of why people changing their minds. So for example, the frustration of we're hiring bins, bringing them to site, people are cutting up materials, and we're actually paying for air to be taken away because no one stacks a bin properly. And I think Nick would probably agree with that. So we've got a scenario that you've got cost and frustration in the admin team, the site team. You've got this idea of you're buying materials to bring to site, to chuck in a bin to take off site, and half the time a 3 cubic metre bin's probably only got 1.5 cubic metres of actual waste. When you start to show all of those to a business, all of a sudden the cost starts to come into it, and it becomes a benefit to do these sorts of things. So yeah, I think it's a very important part for people to understand the cost benefits are actually there.
And you touch on something so interesting there in terms of mindset, and maybe this is more of an open question to all three panelists, is how can we drive the mindset change among every tier within the supply chain tier and everyone involved in trying to address waste reduction problem that we're currently facing in the building and construction? How do we change that mindset?
I'm going to jump in again because I feel like this is what we've had to do the most of in the last couple of years. And Nick, sorry, I'm going to chuck to you too, but the biggest thing is what I've sort of said. I'm understanding more than ever, changing the mindsets comes from teaching people the benefits for them. I used to think that teaching people about benefits for construction, you know what? My designers don't care about benefits for me. They care about benefits for them. Nick mentioned earlier about the concept, and I'm so glad you said it, Nick, about the levies. The reality is the more we can share benefits, either commercially or, you know, even just from an operational point of view, that's how we're changing mindset, because people know what's in it for them.
Yeah, I'll probably say to that, mate. So good points. I think that when we take a look at it ourselves and take a look at what's coming through to us and how do we change that a little bit. I mean, first of all, I mean, we do have a facility that's able to manage mixed waste, as we call it. It's much more expensive for us to put that through. So your gate fee is much higher, first of all. And then we can't process it as well, to be perfectly honest. I mean, we do process it as well as we can, and we get very high recovery rates, but there's still some that slips through the gaps, absolutely. So we really try to work with a lot of our customers on-site separation and segregation. Clean streams allow us to really be able to sort of work with that material a lot better. I guess on-site education is huge too, David, and that's probably one thing that you could think about as well, and probably attest to, is that on-site education and making sure that you don't get a 3 metre bin with 1.5 metres of material in it. And that's just really difficult to manage on site. And that's something that is I think a continual battle for people in construction, to be perfectly candid, to be able to get people to utilise them right. The other thing that I would call out is I would say that we also need to be careful that we're not trying to externalise some of this management as well, because it's very easy to be able to say subcontractors are responsible for their own waste, as an example, to try to offset it from going into bins or things like that. And I think that we need to be really careful with how we do that. I think that on-site separation and being able to deal with those streams is going to be a lot better for everyone, and we're going to get better outcomes. And back to the design point as well, I think it's a really important point. And because the truth is, I mean, we're talking about buildings that have probably got 40, 50, 60-year life. I'm not just, David, that's probably right. What, 60 years is probably the life of the house, maybe more. I mean, we've got plenty of buildings that are 100 years old in Sydney. But just saying that I think that it's really important that we start the design has to happen now, because by the time we actually get to really see that modularization of those assets is still quite some time away. So we've still got quite a bit of transition time. So within that transition time, how we actually making sure that we optimize what we do with those materials that we receive, because it's not waste, it's resources in most circumstances.
Yeah. And Nick, while I have you there, there's one question that I feel like most of our participants are sort of like wondering is, are the levies that you've mentioned, are they at the right level? And do levies actually cover the true holistic cost on waste? And just to add on to that question on levies is, how then do you balance that financial side and encouraging waste reduction at the same time? Do you find yourself in a bit of a pickle sometimes and you're like, how do I balance that at the end?
Interestingly, no, we want to see the materials come through in a way that we don't have to put it into the landfill because it offsets our levy costs. So our business model is almost based around that. So I guess to the point of your question around the levies, are they at the right level? New South Wales, they're up there, and they're slowly increasing in Victoria over time at the moment. I think that standardisation of levies across the board as well, we'll see less of that, what we saw in the past happening, and lots of businesses were doing it, and they were actually transferring waste up to places like Queensland because the levies weren't there. So it was just cheaper to actually ship waste interstate, which is insane. I mean, it's just insane, but it was an activity that happened commonly within the sector, really. And I think that the levies really give us a good indicator for that to not to happen. So that's a really important one. I think that New South Wales is probably close to right. Maybe it could probably continue to increase a little bit more. As we see those levies at around about those levels or slightly higher, we do see that innovation starts to make sense. And some of these really cool initiatives, I mean, some of the stuff that I'm working on, we're working with our innovation hub internally and taking a look at what innovations do we need to undertake to help us to start to really truly realise circular. Now, we're taking a look at some really interesting technologies around some of that residual to either methanol or residual to hydrogen, and then the viability of being able to use that back into our fleet. So that's something that we're genuinely exploring at the moment. So I think that the levies provide a positive indicator in terms of keeping the waste out of landfill and start to really put that commercialisation of projects up the ladder, because it's expensive to put it into a hole. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, thanks so much, Nick, for that. And there's a question here coming through for Emma. Before I hand over to Team C, I see a hand being raised there. I see you, not that I'm ignoring you, Team C. So is there a way of encouraging materials to be removed, Emma, carefully from a building, from a building being demolished, particularly when you're looking at the DA level? Could there be some form of encouragement where these materials that are being removed should be reused or enforced to be reused, and whether the OH&S levels prevents owners and also demolition companies from allowing willing people to remove them? I know that's a long question and I should have rambled on like that.
Oh, good. I'll try and answer it succinctly. It's a very good question. And there, you know, Valentina in the first session touched on things that are happening in Europe. There are business models that are developing in Europe which are contextual, as in they need to be you know, within a region. So, you know, that might be Sydney, that might be the Illawarra, for example, if we were thinking locally, where businesses effectively go and they do dismantle buildings and they create then a repository of materials that are available for other people to purchase, and there's that model exists. Now obviously that is geographically it needs to be geographically related, because otherwise we end up, as Nick's just saying about waste being shipped elsewhere, you know, you're kind of defeating the purpose. In terms of enforcing that, I think we'll move in that direction, and I'm not sure how, but over in the UK very recently, there was quite a high profile building, which was, it was actually not given planning approval because of the embodied impacts of it. It was a big Foster's and Partners building, which was effectively a kind of observatory, and it was a huge amount of materials. And that's showing that actually that was a planning appeal process, which was, it was implemented based on the impact of the materials in that building. And Marks and Spencer's, who are a big retail chain in the UK, they're currently proposing to demolish a building they've got on Oxford Street and rebuild something of the same size. And there's a lot of backlash happening around that. And people are saying, no, you need to adaptively reuse the existing building, not demolish it. I think that those things are going to start to come into the process. I think we're maybe a little bit further behind here, but things are also moving quite quickly. And you know, those impacts of waste and embodied carbon, it's all interrelated. So whilst I've kind of jumped from one subject to another, I think they are related. I can see that Nick's unmuted himself, so I think he probably wants
I wanted to
something.
add to that. Yeah, thanks. Look, I've been involved in a process just recently where we're trying to undertake a project that would actually deconstruct and understand the building materials. I will just say that it is so hard, but that's okay, because it's going to be hard because it's the first, it's really embryonic, right? One of the interesting things is that people tend to point to everyone at the left as to who has the ownership and responsibility, which is really interesting. But I think those discussions need to be had because from a practical point of view, we need to understand where the different actors see where that responsibility lies and then start to allocate that out. I think it's viable. I genuinely do think it's viable. I think that it's not, unfortunately, going to be all the products from, I mean, when we currently think about current building stock, it wasn't ever designed to be pulled apart and reused. So some of those materials it's just not going to be viable with, but there is going to be certain materials within that building stock that we're going to be able to reuse and repurpose. Absolutely. So I think it's about being quite pragmatic with our approach and understanding that you're not going to nail it. It's not going to be this 100% fantastic repurposing. But I think we need to start somewhere, and it needs to start now. But the conversations are happening around this. So it is quite interesting to be involved. And I think that for people that are really sort of entrepreneurial, there's some real opportunity there to be able to create some new business models that would actually, I think, be great indicators to the market for this to happen more broadly.
Thanks so much again, Nick. Team C, do you want to throw in your question now, or?
Yeah, those are great questions, by the way, and great responses. And Emma's heard a lot about my little ideas during my thesis. But this question is for David. Just with those, the modular panel sort of system that you were talking about, I loved that you started talking about like standardizing different shapes so you can do economics of scale. So that's something I talked about in my thesis as well. And I think that why don't they just make these module panels like a smaller size and standardize the panel size so that at the end of the building life, you can go beyond the reduction in construction waste, but then you can deconstruct the building instead of demolish and go through the normal linear model, and then you can just deconstruct. And then once you've deconstructed all these panels, they can all be reused. And then it could follow into Nick's part, where instead of all this room for landfill and remanufacturing, it could just be all that freed up room could just be a storage plant for those reused modules.
You know what, this is why I do presentations like this, because those kinds of ideas are fantastic. It's what we need for the future of this industry. To answer your question, that's exactly what we're going to try and achieve. What you're talking about, we're sort of calling as being a bit of a product catalog kit of parts, if you like, and trying to make individual kit of parts as efficient as possible. And you're taking it a step further, and don't want to give away too much, but the idea of not just being able to deconstruct, to take away and reuse, but to deconstruct, take back to the factory, upgrade to the latest technology, bring back to site and reuse to the same customer, quarter of the time, quarter of the price of the knockdown rebuild. Like, there are so many opportunities like that. The only thing that's going to continue to drain this scenario in this country, and this is no disrespect to our country, but we are a society that really likes the uniqueness of design. We have got to keep generating change in the mindset of the customer. And it is changing, we're seeing it already. But it's the customer in Australia that likes to stand on their front lawn and water their garden and say, check out my house, it's different than everyone else's. It's not like that in the Scandinavian countries or in North America. They've got a need for efficiency and performance. So where do we start? We have to start slow, and we've definitely got a couple of opportunities where we're trying to standardize certain panels. But I will say it starts to head back to that point of compromising the design too much to standardize everything. So we're starting with take chunks at a time. We're getting certain panels that we know repeat themselves heaps. They are 600 mil wide, 2.8 meters high, and we're learning that we can start with some, and we'll always need to, for the next, I don't know how long, certain panels that are bespokely designed to suit a design that the customer wants. But we're definitely heading down that path, and well done for bringing it up, because it's people like yourself that are really going to change this industry for good. So well done, mate.
Thanks so much, David. Thanks so much, Team C. Unfortunately, we've come to the end of our time, our question and answer. These are those type of seminars and webinars that need to go all day, because we can spend a whole entire week here, and it's just going to be ideas and technology and entrepreneurial things. But for me, it's to say thank you, and I'll hand it over back to Tim for more direction on the webinar. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Makrita, and thank you everybody for fielding those questions. We've had a really vibrant morning, I think, and we started out with Ken McBride. And one of the things that I took from Ken's talk was about a culturally sensitive consultation in Vanuatu, that he brought his wife on the consultation, and the point he made there was that the women will tell different things to a woman and the men will tell different things to the men. And I think that to me was a nugget that I took away from that. And his journey from plastics to wood and plastic composites or amalgams, I thought is quite interesting, and I'm keen to follow that up. Monica Richter emphasized the importance of pre-design, and we saw that coming through really pretty much in a lot of the presentations. And this is a key to reducing the embodied carbon in our built environment. Usha, Jonas, and Valentina, they came together with very rapid fire presentations, emphasizing the importance of policy and research in the area. And I think the stat that we got from Jonas, that only 8.6% of the world is actually a fully circular economy. So we've got a long way to go. And he also, said that there's going to be jobs in this area. It's big business, and it's only going to get bigger. Then Suzanne, I think she gave us the carrot, stick, and tambourine model. And I think today is part of the tambourine as well. And I think we should be shining the light on our students' work. So I just put a shout out for this afternoon session where our teams of students are presenting the culmination of their work. They've come on a really extensive journey. And they're a mix of skills within each team. Some engineers, some social scientists, some well, every discipline that we have at our university, and we've got a total of 8 universities involved in the program. So quite a challenging thing, and a shout out to Leela for organizing that. David, I'll come back to the collaboration model that you gave us, that to share the benefits, and I think that's really important. You also demonstrated how the digital modeling can lead you to more efficient design. So we're coming back to that pre-design issue that Monica mentioned earlier in the morning. And Nick, I'm impressed with the way your industry is embracing new technologies to take every waste as a resource. I think that was the comment that we had from Suzanne, and you're actually doing that, in real time, and investing in that very advanced technology that's going to help us down the track. And we finished up with Emma, who was staggered at the cost of all of this, and we've been working on a project together. And this is, it's a huge industry, and I can see why Macquarie bought Bingo, because this is such a growth industry in terms of what we need to do to improve our use of materials and get those materials back into great use. So I think there's a very strong business imperative. So that's my summary of the morning. If Leela's there, if we can show the slide for the session this afternoon. So we can
I'm just bringing it up now.
okay, and look, Leila is the architect of this symposium, and has pulled it together, and is the architect of the Sustainable Homes Challenge, which has been running over the whole session. We'll do another shout out to our sponsors, and our teams, our prize sponsors for this afternoon's session are the Housing Trust, who've come in with the first prize. The Chief Scientist of New South Wales has sponsored this particular symposium. Engineers Australia and BlueScope have been very generous with their cash prize donations as well. And overall, the whole thing has come together because of the McKinnon Walker Foundation. This is a foundation set up by a previous Vice Chancellor, which provides the current Vice Chancellor with a pot of money to do crazy things. And we were asked to do a crazy thing coming back from the solar decathlon at the end of 2018. And our plan was to run this in 2020, and COVID put a stop to that. And COVID made it an online event rather than a face-to-face event. But what we will hope to do is in the new year, our 5 teams who will be presenting this afternoon, we'll have a reunion on campus, and we'll get together and we'll share all the learnings that we've had throughout this session. And we'll see where all of these very enthusiastic, clever, future leaders of our industries are, where they're heading in the new year. So I'll invite you all to come back at 2 o'clock, have a break now, have some lunch, and we'll be reconvening here at 2 o'clock, where our Vice Chancellor, Patricia Davison, will be welcoming all the teams in and the judges, and we'll have a talk as well from Michelle Adair, who's the CEO of the Housing Trust and has been instrumental in providing information for our students to design their houses.